Welcome to What CEOs Talk About. Do you wonder what CEOs talk about behind closed doors? How they bring their vision to reality? How do they overcome and succeed through adversity? We share that and so much more with each episode. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, this is Martin Hunter, your host of the What CEOs Talk About show, where we talk about translating strategy into frontline operations. Past guests include Dominic Rubino from the Profit Toolbelt. People are going to say, who is this Dominic? He's my best buddy. So that's why I drop his name all the time. Jeremy Weiss from Inspired Insider, Mark Raffin from Negotiations Ninja, Matt Newman from Alpha Foods, and Ryan McKenzie from True Earth. That is TRU Earth. This episode is brought to you by Urgio. Urgio is Latin for to urge, a strong desire to drive change, stimulate thought, incite feeling, encourage action. Urgio provides fractional COO services to move you through growing pains so that your company can flourish and profit. Grant, you have access to a lot of CEOs both ways. How important is it for CEOs and visionaries to have an integrator as part of their business team?
So when you say integrator, is that someone to take like all those brilliant ideas that wake them up at 2:30, 3:30, 4:30 and actually like make action out of them?
Yeah.
I think it's pretty important to have that, right? Because one can just sit there and have this endless stream of like amazing ideas, but if none of them ever see the light of day, then it's kind of not really going to get too far. And so in some cases, somebody might realize that they're a fantastic idea generator and they need to bring on effectively their COO,
correct?
Their magic makers. And I think they have to give them, that COO like runway to do things and also permission to like muzzle them at times, right? Because if they're coming out with like 3 amazing ideas per day, but they never get implemented, then again, there's like, quite a lot of struggle. And then for folks that maybe don't have that COO, then they have to really have that kind of internal role, right? And muzzle themselves, right? And I'm a solopreneur and I struggle a lot with that is that, how do I shut or, restrain the ideas to actually put some of them into play?
Yeah. Well, thank you. So if you have that company, if you're that visionary CEO or you're a VC and you have one of those visionary CEOs at the helm of one of your business that, to use Grant, you want to muzzle a little bit, you want to focus and you really want to monetize, have somebody monetize their great vision, then Urgio is that integrated component. So go to urgio.ca or info@urgeo.ca. Urgio has worked with a multitude of companies from SaaS, CPG, mining, transportation, startups, all the way to large multinational corporation. Grant, thank you very much for being on the show. Grant Bullington was a franchise development at Got Junk. So for those who don't know what 800 Got Junk, look it up. Massive franchising success story. He's been with FranNet for 12 years and he just started his podcast. So Franchise Scout. And Grant works with one-on-one with prospects and CEOs. And so, Grant, today, what do you want to put at the middle of the conversation?
I meet so many people who, dream of one day owning their own business. Mm-hmm. Or when we think about what's going on right now in light of, COVID and all, where there's, folks that are in career transition and they're really not sure like what their next move is. And so they want to look at owning their own business, not so much out of, hey, I got to pursue this dream, but more out of a necessity because it's like, I don't have a job and I don't know where I'm going to find my next one. We need to take a different approach. What would that look like? I think that's probably where I could, add the most value in terms of like how somebody can go about, becoming their own either self-employed or CEO or something in between.
So to summarize, right, and from another perspective, is you own a business, how do I, potentially, franchise? So to have both sides. So the question, let's call it to franchise or not to franchise. Let's call that the title of this episode today. So
for sure.
Grant brings like experience on working in the business with God Junk, right? So he was business representative, and so he was really pushing at getting everybody out there. But then you turn it around, and now you're the opposite. You're working for the prospect component. So tell me, let's start with that. What's the big difference between a company who wants to franchise and looking hard to franchise and somebody who wants to become a franchise owner, like franchisee and franchisor? Can you explain the difference a little bit for us?
Perfect. I should probably warn you, you'd think that this long in the franchise industry, I wouldn't mix up the franchisees and the franchisors. I occasionally do. So if you find yourself confused, it's because I confused you. We call them Z's and Zors.
Z's and Zors. Oh, that's awesome.
So let's start with the franchisor, right? It's the mothership, right? Mm-hmm. So, and typically it happens like this, that somebody came up with a business and they're like, okay, I'm going to start my business. And then people ask them about, hey, can I try this in a different market? Or this looks really good. And, a smart franchisor or wannabe franchisor will, put together like a robust system and, call it a business in a box, if you will. Mm-hmm. So it's, if you're going to go start this business, this is where you would start it and how you'd start it. And these are all the mistakes that I made, and now you don't have to. Mm-hmm. And, quite simply, like one of the appeals of if, again, me expanding a business via the franchise model is I'm able to do it faster than if I were to try to do this corporately on my own. Mm-hmm. And a few reasons why. One is that when you've got some momentum with, interest in your franchise, is you may get 10 serious inquiries in 10 different metros, all wanting to start, roughly at the same timeline. And that would be impossible to do just even from an operational standpoint. Mm-hmm. If you're going to do that, say corporately, like hire 10 GMs and say, good luck.
Yeah.
The other thing that can be really advantageous to the franchise model is that you get people coming with their capital.
True. Yeah.
So now you don't have to go, how am I going to finance my startup in, like Dallas and Toronto and Winnipeg and mm-hmm. Moose Jaw or wherever. That's going to be a lot of, trips to the bank, and it's not very easy to do versus if you have, somebody in those markets invests and they're willing to, bring their capital to the table. Now it's going to happen faster, right? They're bringing their capital. And then with that is, most people who invest in a franchise, they want to see their money successful. Mm-hmm. So what they're not going to do is turn their back on it and just be like, oh, there's a write-off, right? They're absolutely vested into making this happen. So then as the franchisor, not only are you tapping into other people's capital, but now you can have talent.
True.
Right. And especially if we compare it to the talent that you could probably maybe afford as a startup versus who you can get as a franchisor, it's vastly different.
Hold on a second. So there's 10 lessons in what you just said in about 5 seconds. Okay. So we've got use somebody else's capital, right? So you don't have to go through investment rounds A, B, C, or D, whatever you're at.
Correct.
You've got access to a vested general manager as well. So in regards to looking for talent, these people are putting their money on the table, so therefore they should be invested. I'm sure you got horror stories about that, but that's lesson number 2. You're reducing your kind of you're fast tracking the startup methodology by saying, okay, well, how do I expand my business rapidly without massive influx of corporate overhead and resources? So there's, just to summarize a few things of what Grant said on the franchise Zor, on the Z's Correct. And the Zors. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
You bring on a bunch of keen franchisees who are the right fit. And that's what we'll probably wind up talking about. If you're the franchisor, how do you pick that ideal franchisee, right? And that can be make or break circumstances, even for a really well-established, mature franchise. If they're picking the wrong partners, it's going to really start to struggle. And when you have somebody who's really new to that, if you make a total gaffe on franchisee number 3, that may undo your whole system.
Oh yeah, that's right. So hire slow, fire fast, right? Kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yes.
Cool. All right. Anything else for the Zors? Anything beneficial for the Zors?
I think a big part of it, again, is you just have the pressure's off you, the founder, to come up with all the great ideas on your own. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that can be a rite of passage for the franchise founder to, is to start to hear like other opinions that, hey, maybe we should try this, maybe we should try that. And there's a bit of ego that is like, no, it's just my ideas. They're always the best.
Yeah.
And then at some point, somebody will come along with a better idea than you. And again, if you've got too much ego as the founder and you can't possibly think that maybe somebody came up with a better idea than mine, or I'm not coming up with the best ideas, we can sometimes see a little bit of, struggle taking place, right? Because now you have a clash of egos.
Pride is evil. A lot of people, pride and honor, different things. So yeah, pride is your attachment to something that you built. Honor is the demonstration of. So a lot of people confuse be honorable and pride. Like, it's good that we talk about emotions like this, because I mean, picking a franchise is emotional as well, I'm assuming, from the franchisee's perspective, right?
If a natural tendency is to get really emotional about it. And part of my job is to help them keep emotion from being front and center in the decision. It's always in some way, shape, or form going to come into it. Should it be the driver? No. That's usually we drive into the ditch when we let emotion take the wheel.
Yeah. So tell me, so what's something good? So if somebody wants to, like we talked in the pre-show, somebody wants to pass go and become a CEO, and they go, okay, hey, here's a fast track. I kind of skip the startup phase, right?
It can be, right? So now we're talking about somebody who maybe wants to make a transition from their current role into having a business that they operate, right? And we can talk more about how much time is involved on the investor's standpoint. But the nice thing about when we look at franchising, and for the Canadian listeners, you have like 1,100 different concepts to pick from. And for folks in the US, it's close to 4,000 different opportunities, right? Which means that if you take the right approach, is that you can find something that's a really, really good fit for you. And the advantage is that you're going to partner with an organization that has some extent of history. And it might be, 2 years, 3 years, 2 decades. And when you come along and you're, okay, I'm going to open up this franchise in Vancouver, nobody's here yet, is that you don't have to repeat any of the 2 million mistakes that franchisor or any of its franchisees has made up until now, right? It doesn't mean it's going to be like seamless and there won't be any hiccups. But again, like there's some pretty major decision factors that if you already know, like here's the criteria for the location parameters. Here's who to hire. Here's how to train them. This marketing works. This doesn't work. I mean, when we started looking at, shaving off a lot of risk in a lot of major components that could potentially trip you up if you're left guessing on your own, that's when we can see that the track record and the appeal of getting into a franchise can be, considerably higher.
So it's not easy, right? People think that just because I'm going to purchase a franchise, let's say I make it through the hiring process and all of that. It's not like you're going to rake in the cash immediately. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, correct?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the misnomers is that folks assume that, hey, it's just a business in a box and nothing's going to go wrong. And if anything does go wrong, that, someone from the mothership's going to come and fix it for me. There's still a lot of ways that you can, screw up your own franchise. And I think one of them is just not appreciating how much hard work is really going to be entailed.
Yeah. And so what are some of the biggest mistakes in the hard work? So if you were to list the top things that people need to do when they're purchasing a franchise to become a CEO, they say, well, you know what? I want to be. So hold on a second. Let me back up a little bit. Why do people currently purchase franchise as of 2021?
Because they want something that's safe, right?
Safety.
Like they're going to park it can be a considerable amount of their investment, right? Even if, somebody's like, hey, I'm going to invest, like $100K, like a starting point on that. I mean, that no one really wants to just like burn $100K and, chalk it up as a lesson learned, right? And we can ladder up to where now I'm going to put my house on the line. I'm going to go get bank financing. And there's definitely a lot more at stake. And I think that can be one of the appeals is that you don't have to be the total test pilot on this. Right. They've already, again, like worked out a lot of the kinks, not all of them. but a lot of the kinks there. And then one of the things, assuming that you got in with the right franchise system, is that they have a really strong support network from the franchisor's standpoint, so the mothership. And then you also then get to tap into a network of, helpful owners who, when you have a problem, you can call them and say, hey, my employees are stealing from me. Or I think, how do I know if they are? And how do you kind of, so they've probably worked through a million different things. And I'll go back to the got junk story because, it's a fairly simple business, but of course the simplicity allows the owners to really roll it out on scale. Right. And so what you wind up having is in most markets, a need for, in a lot of cases, double digit fleet of trucks.
Wow.
Right. And you just keep growing the business, and you're hiring people who have never probably driven a diesel vehicle in their life.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think happens when they, once a week, once a month, take that blue junk truck? Well, they go to,
grind the gears,
the other 50 times a year. That's they put regular gas in it, right?
Oh,
and
true.
So,
yeah, that's right.
so you just, now you got this thing where it's, you got people with multi-million-dollar enterprises, and they're still scratching their heads trying to solve rudimentary problems. How do I keep these guys from putting diesel or gas,
gas in the diesel truck, right? Oh my goodness.
So again, there's some systems that have come into play, some ways that you can minimize the likelihood of that happening, because when it does, it takes that truck out of commission for probably 2 days. So you just canceled $4,000 worth of jobs, plus you got your repair bill, and you're mad at your employees, right?
Wow.
So, and I'm sure that left on their own, one person may, but probably won't come up with a workable solution. But then you got 50 other owners who are oh yeah, I know that's happened to me. This is what I've tried. This is what worked.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So now we have a free solution to a costly problem. And that's just one aspect of, how
free solutions. Free solutions. Yeah. Free solutions through the power of networking, right? So because really when you say that there's one individual that's got one truck and now he's got double digit trucks, he's a mini CEO. I mean, he's a CEO of his operations, although, you could consider yourself a CEO that reports to a regulatory body if you want to consider it like that. But basically, you dictate the comings and goings of your business at that level when you've got 15 to 10 to 20 trucks. That's pretty serious year over year revenue, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and when you factor in that number of trucks, and then a factor for how many people you have on payroll, and then a dose of reality is this is how many ways things can go sideways on you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And putting the wrong kind of fuel in the truck is just one of them.
Yeah. So tell us, so I've got my business and I'm man, this is a kick-ass business. I've got 3 locations in one area, right? I'm in Houston, big city. This is really working well. What should I consider to become, before I make the decision to franchise or not to franchise?
Okay, I'm going to give you an answer that nobody likes to hear.
Go ahead.
And I'll put on my cynicism hat here for a second, because I think a lot of people who are I'm going to start a franchise, they open up a spreadsheet and they're okay, I'm going to, they start to look at, I'm going to bring on these franchisees. They're going to pay me this kind of franchise fee, which when you look at the revenue model of a franchisor, the franchise fees can be a pretty big infusion of cash, right? And they come in big chunks. The typical franchise fee is about 50, 60K these days, right? So they're just picturing if I do 5 of those every quarter, that's a ton of cash coming in. And they assume that that's not going to come without some headaches there. But here's the challenge is that in order for you, the franchisor, to get somebody to part with their $50,000 or $60,000 just as the initial investment, is you better have something substantial for which they can say that's worth $60,000. Which means you now have to have some pretty robust operation system. Now, when we look at the reality, somebody who maybe watches too much Shark Tank or Dragon's Den, it's this is really easy. And again, picturing I'm going to bring on 10 franchisees in my first year, what am I going to do with all this revenue? And the reality is that it's not going to be that many. And what are you going to have? How are you going to be able to compete? What you offer for your, let's call it $50,000 franchise fee versus in Canada, the other 1,100 concepts that are also offering, franchises for roughly that fee, right? So you have to have something really robust and competitive. And when you're first starting out, it's all theory, right? So good luck finding that blue sky thinker, dreamer who's going to come on board with you and that it's going to work out all right. So the advice that I always would suggest is that when you think you're ready to franchise, go find somebody. And it's basically like this. I'm going to give you this first franchise. It's not a franchise because I haven't taken any agreements to a lawyer yet. And that's an important thing that we'll come back to. I want you to go around the corner, and test this out. And I want to be able to not babysit you. And you're going to come to me with problems that I didn't know that we would have. And I'll have to then come back to you with solutions and to see what this works. And that should be able to stand on its own for long enough without being babysat. All the while you're writing stuff down. Right. And that's how your system kind of comes into play. And that's what so many folks like to skip is like that actual real world test. And so the advice that I always give to people is, again, give away that first franchise. And the reason why I get like long faces from people is because they're like, well, I can't because I've already mentally budgeted what I'm going to do with the 50K. And it's like, but you need to do that first, because then somebody comes along and they're like, so what do I get for this? And you can say, well, I've actually been testing this out for a while. And you know what, me as the franchisor, I had some things that were unexpected. I got punched in the face a little bit, but I put systems in place so that now you're getting some actual value there. So that together we're not going to have as many obstacles as possible.
Have the right behaviors, have the right systems. So basically, if you think that you've got a startup or you've been in business for less than 5 years and you got 3 locations and you've got explosive growth, don't ever think that you've got systems. You've got systems when anything can hit your front door and you know how to deal with it. So your employees have the right behaviors. They have the systems in place. They have the priorities to deal with independently. So you can walk away. If you can't walk away as a CEO from your business for more than 2 days, don't even think about franchising. That's what I'm hearing.
Correct. And one thing that's like, I think frustrating for the franchisor is that, as you're building your system, let's say you got 10 franchisees, is now you have 10 very different ways in which people will want to try to do things.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take us back to when I was, coming up in high school. I was a lifeguard and I taught swimming lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the tricks you'd use was you throw like a ring and you try to get, convince some kid who's afraid of water to put his face in the water and pick up the ring and realize that he can survive that. So that was the thing, is like, I'm going to throw this ring in and you're going to reach down and pick it up with your hand. But you can't get mad at the kid who doesn't want to put his face in the water and picks it up with his foot and hands it to you.
Smart kid.
Yeah. Right. So you're going to wind up with that is that there's going to be like lots of different ways in order to do things. And when you roll out a system, is that it has to be easy to interpret and really hard to screw it up.
Oh, that's a good one. Easy to interpret and hard to screw up. That's a good one. So it has to be
so
simple
hard to do.
Simple as possible. Because there's so many people that forget that you give instructions, you go, hey, I want you to do this. There's so many assumptions behind all this. We go, yeah, they've got the experience. They know how to do it. And all of a sudden you turn around and you go, shit, that's not what I was expecting. That is not what I was expecting. So it has to be like super, super like grade 5 process. And not even grade 5, like grade 3 process. Do 1, do this, do 2, do this, do that, do this, right? During this situation. But then you have to identify all of the other situations. Is crazy. The thing that I think a lot of people forget when they want to is that, so you're in Houston, you got a kick-ass restaurant or whatever business. So your competitor is limited to the location and industry, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say restaurant, food industry. Excuse me. You got the food industry and you've got Houston to deal with. You got 3 really cool locations. Now you're diving into the franchise pool. Now you're competing with tire sales, tire locations. You're competing with school and education. You're just one of the 4,000 different franchise offerings. So this is a lot more competition. So you better have the best offering on the table, right?
It's got to be compelling. Yeah. Otherwise somebody else will come along with something that's more compelling. And I think,
go ahead.
and where a lot of people, I think, if we're going to pick on food, right? So you have somebody who's like a master chef and they've come up with like the best burger in the world. And their difference is that they put the bacon on sideways.
Mm-hmm.
And they think that's like the compelling reason. Like people will line up around the corner for my burger because I put the bacon on sideways. And at the end of the day, it's like, there's a million other things that really come into play there. And that's what needs to be focused on. And, like we talked about, that there's just so many different things that it's almost like, how could this possibly go wrong? And then you need a really robust system anytime in there. And I don't mean to like simplify it all the way down, but if you do anything more than like once or twice a month in your business, it needs a system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think a lot of even, people who want to scale their own business and not worry about bringing on franchisees, is that they leave everything up here, right? And they don't systematize it. Because of course, if you're like, okay, I'm growing too fast, I need to hire somebody, and they show up day one and they're like, okay, what do you want me to do? And you're like, I don't know, because I haven't thought it out and I certainly haven't written it down yet. So go there and do something for a bit, and see, right? So if you're, again, going to have somebody come along and say, okay, you've got my business in Dallas, right? You better have everything all sorted out so they know exactly what to do. And there's a million ways that things can go wrong. And that's obviously what you as the franchisor have to do is, have those safety nets or mechanisms in place so that they focus on the right thing at the right order and the right time. It can be overwhelming, which is why oftentimes you'll see that it'll take franchisors like a significant number of years to get to the part where they finally feel like they've got momentum. Mm-hmm. They actually have franchisees who, without a lot of struggle, want to buy this business, and then they come on board and they're the right one. And then the franchisor is basically, I have to stand out of their way and facilitate them building a business.
Yeah, I think.
And then I got to take their great ideas and share it with the rest of the group.
You said it. Let's come full circle. You said people who want to get a franchise want safety. They don't want the startup. They don't want the heartaches of the startup. It's a different mindset. They say, okay, I want you to tell me what to do. I'm going to trust you with my $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. I'm going to say, okay, you are going to tell me how to maximize my revenue. Better hold your part of the deal. There's a lot, like you're saying, a lot of people want that safety net. They don't want that startup mentality, that entrepreneurship is not for them. They just say, hey, give me a business in a box so that ultimately I can make money under my own direction or on my own time. Right?
Yes.
And go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say, like, some people, like, when they're looking at a franchise, assume that, hey, I'm going to buy this business and it's going to tell me everything I need to do. And that, it may be almost unappealing because it's like, well, where do I come into play? Right. Mm-hmm. I'm just this like working stiff now. And that's, in a lot of cases, it's not like they're really looking for, like the owner's enthusiasm, talents, creativity to come on board. And it's simply that you're going to get to apply this with a proven system rather than, guess and get mm-hmm. frustrated or run out of money on your own.
Okay. Who does it really well? Who through COVID has done franchisors really well? Because we've had a lot of not to-do lists on the not to-do list. So what's on the to-do list? Who does it well? And you go, wow. And I mean, you can say names or whatever you want, but I don't want you to sell anybody, but who is really at the top of the list and saying, you know what? These guys really do it, well.
Okay, I got to have a disclaimer here. Because if I mention a category, like within that particular category, let's pick on painting for a while.
Okay.
Right. So you've got in the painting space, nationally or internationally, like, a good host of players. I could probably like name off 10 right now. And then you could talk about it in your particular market. And you'll probably find some, smaller scale players that I had no idea about.
Yeah.
Just because they're all in a category that universally is doing well does not mean that they're all universally doing well.
Correct.
So under no circumstances am I saying you're fail safe in approaching any
painting company. Yeah.
But that's an area that we could maybe expand out a little bit more and just look at like the residential services and home repairs and home renovations have been like a white hot category since homeowners felt it was safe to have a stranger in their house.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Because I think what's happening is a lot of people are realizing I'm not going to Mexico or Europe. I mean, I got a friend of mine who bought all new ski gear in Toronto this year and was like planning to come out to Whistler. And it's like, he's just looking at his skis. He can't even ski on Blue Mountain. And I feel really bad for him.
They don't have mountains out there. They have little hills.
Well, that's part of, I would have felt bad for him anyway, getting all that new gear for that. But so you get a lot of people who are like, housebound. And, if they're still working, then they don't have as many ways to, have some fun ways to spend their discretionary income. And so now they're looking at their houses and they're like, well, maybe I will paint now, or maybe I will do that project now. And
gotcha.
So we're seeing that, that category with the right player has done like exceptionally well. And it hasn't been like, perfect, right? Because they've behind the scenes probably had like, a ton of like supply chain issues. And it's like, okay, so what's the new SOP for your employees showing up on site?
Oh yeah, all this COVID stuff. Yeah.
Like, there's a lot to worry about, right? And so how to have this, done properly. And of course, I would pity the franchisors where they have franchisees in all sorts of different jurisdictions who are.
Oh my goodness, I agree. Right? Oh. Yeah.
So then this kind of stems back to, picking the right franchisee who are not just standing there saying, please solve my problems for me. Instead, it's somebody who's like, hey, I'm going to solve this problem. You just make sure with me that I'm doing it right. So that you have this like problem solving, forward thinking, proactive franchisee. And again, not somebody who's like just sitting down waiting for the solution to get, rolled out.
Good friend of mine, Neil Courtney from Cookie Cutters was when it hit, oh my goodness, this is like a year ago. He was like that. Talk about impact, right? You got to cut your business in half because you can only have 6 feet apart and you've got chairs to cut kids, at 3 feet apart. So he had to do math and, really tackle that major problem. He's done amazing with that. But talk about really refocusing all your procedures and protocols, right? You want a CEO that's quick on his feet and still has that agile mentality, right? How do I adapt? How do I fix this problem? How do I disseminate those methodologies, right? So, okay. So, home rentals. And so why are they doing it? Why are they good?
Again, I think people are having like a, increased, they've reallocated their budget to, things around their house, right? They're like, hey, I got to spend money on
so let me rephrase the question then. Who is not necessarily hot, but who is doing a very good job at taking, or industry wise, without naming names, who is really good at recruiting franchisors or onboarding franchisees? Sorry.
Yes.
Who is doing like system wise and all that good stuff?
Again, we've seen a lot of success in like demand for categories that are doing well.
Okay.
And on the flip side, there's a lot of categories that, I wouldn't think that a smart investor who wants to, coming into something like this would be really hot to trot to go into a business that it's like, okay, this is going to be tough enough go if I have 100%, potential revenue on this. And now we're going to like knock that down to, like 50%. I think a lot of people are just going to take the approach of like, I will wait until I'm able to operate my business without this added level of challenge of, having to, reduce my, if it's fitness, like class sizes.
Mm-hmm.
I drive by a fitness studio every day, and that's how I anecdotally figure out what's going on in the fitness world these days, because sometimes it's dark. For a while there, it was like, okay, there's actually double-digit people in there, and then it was dark again, and now most I ever see is like 3 or 4 people, right, at any one given time. Now, this is totally anecdotal.
Yeah, of course.
But that may not be the time that I would look to open up that type of business. And I'm working with a client who actually opened a franchise with his wife in that same, it's a franchise that I drive by, and it's tough, right? That's not an easy category to get into when the sun is shining and you have a tailwind. It's especially hard when you've got people knocking on your door saying you can't do this, right? Yeah. And it's, every market's different. Like, can't have this type of class, and other ones are like, oh, okay, well, you can have this type of class. And so it's, kind of, I guess, the local politicians' mood, like what they're in, whether or not you can or can't do business.
Yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say like food would be, another category. Like if it was going to be like QSR, right? I walked by, it was, a fairly new startup where they've got mostly QSR pizza. And how fantastic is this? They're in the ground floor of an office, and above it, they've got like 28 floors of potential customers every day who are now working from home, right? So I don't know if they've been dishing pizza lately. I don't think so. So that's one of those where unless somebody's like, that's okay, I'll, commit to this and I won't worry about actually making pizza for 2 years, right? That's one option there. Whereas when we look at, what's going on with, a lot of uncertainty is that we oftentimes see this, that people are like, okay, I'm going to get into a business. I am not going to swing for the fences right now. So I don't want to go and invest what it would take to open up that pizza franchise. I want to actually look at what I can do to self-fund on my own. And so this is where we see, those $150,000, $200,000 businesses, still not a short amount of cash, but it's not as bad as like $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. Right. And they can come into it and they can start like really small and kind of get some toeholds. And even if they're constrained with how much, revenue they can do in a given day, they can, again, staff accordingly, start small as things start to progress, is, be adding that staff. Whereas in a lot of the service-based concepts that we've seen, the struggle is not, restraining things and starting slow. It's coming home from training, or rather do your training at home. And now you're going to start this business, and it's like, just buckle in, because you've got what used to be, you start some marketing and in a couple of weeks, you'll have some customers, on the books, and then you'll start booking jobs, like a week or then 2 weeks out.
Yeah.
Sometimes these folks have jobs booked 3-4 months out from the moment they start.
Wow.
So now you got this, that it's like, here's my brand new business. I've got like 10 days of it under my belt, and I'm booked to the high heavens, right? So totally different problem to have. And this is where, again, I think that, with the franchisor who's like, that's okay, we'll work with you on this. You've got all the guidance and resources in the world to do this. And I think one of the big differences that we've seen with which franchise our clients are going with, right? Because I'll give them a few different options and say, let's go have a look. And it's ultimately their decision as to, what floats their boat. But we've generally seen like a really strong appeal to franchise systems that have been around for longer. Right?
Well, there's a couple of benefits, right? So you can think about marketing aspects, right? So the thing that I would want to franchise for would say, okay, the marketing components, right? You don't have to sell anything. You look at something that's already been established and you go, wow, these guys have been on the market for, I don't know, McDonald's, talk about McDonald's forever, right? But the more clout they have, the bigger paycheck, the bigger check that you have to cut, I'm assuming as well. So there's no. No,
I mean, it's like McDonald's is a tough example because of what it takes to get in from an time investment standpoint, and the qualification and the fact that it's pretty scarce availability.
Yeah. So I guess yeah.
And I'm sure it's like a huge funnel of like potential inquiries that they get, and to find like that one person who then you basically go volunteer for like a year to get your location. And I've had clients who came to me after they've been in that queue with McDonald's for a number of years. And, every month or so the phone would ring and they're like, yeah, what do you got for me now? And they're like, give them the name of this town, and they'd have to Google it. It's like, I never heard of it, right? It requires a relocation to it.
Yeah.
Right? So for the person who's like, oh, this would be great, like there's no McDonald's like just down the street from me, that's where I'm going to go. It's not going to be like that at all.
Because it's real estate based, right? They all base it on
and they
population.
know exactly where they want to locate, and it's probably not where you want to.
Most likely.
Yeah. I mean, but if you were to look at, what it would cost to have doors open, investment all in for a McDonald's is probably not that much different than if you were to go into, some franchise system that nobody's ever heard of.
True. Yeah.
Right. Because, the even take the franchise fee out of the equation, partly because they're roughly the same. You still got the real estate acquisition cost and the build out cost. And then it costs, probably a little more money to market your customer, because you have to educate them that it's like, hey, you know what, this is a great burger because we put our bacon on sideways. It does take a fair amount of time. So it's not like, McDonald's is holy grail and it's the most expensive one to get into. I mean, it's, if we looked at, and this is what the prospective owner would do, is like absolutely sharpen their pencil to understand like, what's my true investment going to be for my market? It's probably in line with, names you may have already known, or if you're going to be, the first one to take a new concept into town, they're still expensive.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the marketing component is the bigger one, right? So I'm assuming that once you do a little bit of marketing, but there's a name attached to it, there's systems in place. They know how to market throughout, because I know the fitness area is big on that. They ask the franchisees to do marketing. I mean, back then, door to door and all that good stuff. So that's a component that is to consider as well. So as a franchisor, if you're the CEO of that company, you better have a kick-ass chief marketing officer to be able to leverage that where people believe in your marketing strategy and plan, right?
Not just believe in it, but can go find the data to back up the fact that it works.
It's true, yeah.
Right. And so oftentimes, like when we're looking at, a business that's not a household name, like McDonald's or Boston Pizza or something, is that we can't necessarily look and see the value from a brand awareness strategy.
Correct.
Is that we instead have to look and see, okay, what's the brand development strategy? What's the evidence of this organization coming into a market completely ice cold and getting that toehold of like enough people know about it to get enough transaction. Now we've got a little bit of cash flow. Let's keep reinvesting that and turn that awareness, toehold into a foothold, into, like a stable platform, and to keep building from there. And if I'm going to look at a business, I would want to see that it wasn't just like a one-off fluke in a particular market. So tell me a success story in average. So let me ask you a question. So I've got all my systems in place. I've got good behaviors. I got 4 or 5 locations. I've been thinking about franchising. I'm putting my first one on for free. When do I, as the CEO of a brand new startup, a brand new franchise, when can I expect some decent returns? When I go, okay, you know what? We've got momentum. We've got cash flow. What kind of years or months are we looking at? How many franchises do I need on average? And how much time does it take me to get the ball rolling? The first one you said, the years. I think it's realistic that we account in that. And here's why we often see that's the case, is that a lot of people will come in and they bootstrap their first location and it's doing okay. They start a second one and it's like, it's doing not bad. When we look at it as, single operator, multiple locations, like you're doing okay. If we then say, okay, I'm going to go hang my shingle out and start to get franchisees, the first, I guess, wake up call for the franchisor is, why isn't my phone ringing? I've got this amazing business. Why don't we want it? So then you got to go find some franchisees.
Pride kicks in the way again, right?
Yeah. And maybe it's like the first major blow that they've been dealt with is that it's like, wow, there's not a lineup of people. I've got this like so-so website and I've even got a form that people can fill out. Like, why am I not swimming in quality prospective owners, right? Just so that they have, like a really robust system, they can demonstrate it and articulate it. And then, here's the challenge is now they go drop in the Thunderdome with some really well-heeled big boys with big budgets.
Yeah.
Right. And those folks can throw more money at one keyword than the startup franchisor can afford on a complete annual budget.
Wow.
Right? And that's, and then they got to find the right person and articulate that through. And meanwhile, that same individual has another 1,000+ concepts that they can be looking at. Right. And sometimes it's the case of like, who do I feel best organization wise for me to park my money with? And if it's somebody who's like just figuring this out on their own and it may or may not work and we're not super confident with what they've got, versus if I can go with somebody who, let's call them a successful emerging franchise, right? They've been in business for 5 years, successfully franchising it for 3. And as part of my research, I can talk to 20 people in 20 different metros who have all started this and most are quite happy with what they're doing. That's a very different level of comfort than, geez, I hope this works out with this stranger who's, pretty keen on his system. So what winds up happening is that it takes people longer to get to that, kind of, let's call it a milestone of having 10 franchisees. And that they probably had to find more prospective franchisees than they ever thought was imaginable to find those 10. And they, let's assume that they got like let's say they got a lower franchise fee. Let's kind of, make it more attractive for some people. So my franchise fee is not 50, it's 25K. By the time those people are done training, that 25K is long gone, right? So now you got to support these basically like newborn entrepreneurs with your own budget.
Yeah.
And you're going to need to do that for a long time until you get their doors open, and then they start producing enough revenue that you're actually seeing some form of royalty revenue coming into play.
So what are we looking at? 4 or 5 years?
I would say probably have to have like some form of like positive cash flow on a franchisee level, probably about 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
Although we work with this one system that they have 5-year terms, like length of their franchise agreements, which is fairly common. And, they're past like 150 locations, but they still, as an organization, believe that it's okay to not make any money on their franchisees in that first term.
Yeah.
That's a long play, right? That you're having to pick somebody and God, I hope they sign, renew on a second 5-year term, because that's when we may start to make some money off these folks.
But that brings the fact that you don't have to go with a big box to be successful. There's a lot of variables in here that, you take the time to take any prospect through a very rigorous process. Sorry, I said process twice there. You take them through a rigorous process to really define what the risk is, what their intent is, what their culture fit is, so that it's not willy-nilly. You don't come in to 4,000 different types of franchise without a clue and go, hey, close your eyes, ping the tail on the donkey, and oh, look at that. It's Goodyear tires. I don't know. I don't even know Goodyear's a franchise.
I don't need it, actually.
Got to look that up. It's not pin the tail. What FranNet does is, with Grant, is he takes you through a list of questions that identify, that kind of points you in a direction to be able to make an educated guess in the pools that you have, because it is, like you said, it's the Thunderdome, right? Who would want to take on Tina Turner? She's a badass in that movie. So
exactly, right. So I think like there's, a lot of factors like conspiring against success, right? Both the franchisor as well as the prospective franchisees. And that's why it's, take a slow and steady approach. And I don't mean to be like poo-pooing the franchise model at all, because again, I get to work with so many different brands. And when I look at the success that they've had, it's like really inspiring to see. And it's also from, the prospective franchisee wants to come in, that it's like, this is great because I can partner up with these folks and kind of get on a moving platform and build it from there, not have to be floating down a river trying to build a raft.
I don't know how helpful we've been in the past hour. We've spoken to franchise or not to franchise. There's so many different variables. It's like to be or not to be. I think that the biggest thing is either or, a franchisor or a franchisee. You need to, one, get sound advice. That's number one. Really define if your business is ready for it. So get good assistance to find out if your business is there or not. Then on the franchisee side is the same thing. Do your research, reach out to Grant and say, hey, is this for me? And so as Grant is really the link between both of you, both the franchisors and the franchisees, about the CEOs. But ultimately, when let me ask you the last question. Who's the best CEO that you've seen in the franchise, either or side? Give me the best CEO behaviors. If you don't want to name names, that's fine. But in the years of, you've been in this for 12 plus years, who's the best CEO of the biggest franchisors that you've seen, and why?
There's a lot of examples. I think the common theme is that they've long checked their ego at the door, and they have a giant set of ears like Dumbo.
Okay.
Right. And they're willing to hear feedback from the field. Like that could be their franchisees, good, the bad, and the ugly. And at every point, they're like, how can I make my business better? And how can I roll this out as a system? right? And to be okay that it's like, it's the pressure's off, that they don't have to come up with all those amazing ideas on their own. And in fact, what they can do is that, let's assume they've taken the time to get, some responsible, qualified, entrepreneurial franchisees who can come up with some great ideas on their own, and with a little bit of balance, take those systems and then figure out, okay, how do I roll this out system wide? Right. And that's oftentimes where we'll see like the best systems that the franchisor gets to say, look at this. This is what you get when you start our systems. If you were to actually like take that down, it's probably going to start at a location, like a franchise location level, but got built out from there to the mothership and then distributed across the franchisee platform.
Okay. Now let's tip it on the other side. Tell me, who's the best, and what's the best behavior that you've seen from a person who's gone from 0 to 100, and what's the right behaviors from on the franchisees side?
I'm glad he clarified, because I could have just answered the same question again on the Zor side. So it's kind of like this delicate balance where they also may have to check some ego a little bit. And I think that we touched a little bit on like the emotion before. So step one is to make your decision without, emotion being like the total driver's seat, right? That we want to take almost the same philosophy you would pick if you were going to decide am I going to buy this stock with, 10% of my investment portfolio? You don't buy because you like the logo, or you're even a customer of them. Like, you probably have some pretty smart people who are looking at all sorts of formulas that I'm not going to embarrass myself and even like say, right? Make a really like data-driven decision. That's what you ultimately want to do in that. And a big part of that is that as you're learning, okay, I'm learning all about this business and what it takes to be successful, is that you kind of have like a two-part evaluation process. The first one is, can I do this, right? Do I have the necessary talents and skills to put this into place? And then the second one is, will I do this? And it has to check both of those, right? And then when it's like, yes, I can do this and I will do this, that, you have to really make peace with yourself that there will be times that I need to do not what I want to do, but what my business needs me to do, right? And that's where it's like, become humble.
Needs and wants. Priority one is, what do I need to do and what I want to do? What do I need to do is whatever my wife tells me to do. That's number one for me. What I want to do is want to go ride my motorcycle. That's far down the list. So
that's very different, right? But if you play your cards right, then you can, buy motorcycles and go ride them,
She tells you can, right?
Yeah. So when we look at like a business, like an example would be, like I have to be really honest with clients that it's like, are you really prepared to do this? And some of the lower cost options means that the franchisee winds up being like the rainmaker, which means you have to pick up that phone and make some cold calls. You have to talk to those customers and turn them from prospects into customers, and then focus on the operations to keep them coming back for more. And most people's handset starts weighing about a ton if they don't like doing it or they can't actually do it.
It's true. If you don't do it, somebody will tell you have to do it. That's for sure.
But when you're your own franchisee, like it's got to be you kicking your own ass.
It's true. So you're the boss.
That's when you have to see the balance of like this is up to you. So like every morning you're brushing your teeth, you're like, this is what my business needs me to do today. Even if it's like, eat that frog, don't want to do it. That's what you need to do in your particular business.
Eat the frog first. Always eat the frog first at the pond. Speaking of learning, last two questions. Leaders are learners. What are you learning right now? What's the one thing that Grant is looking to learn?
Well, in launching a podcast, I don't think I'll ever be done learning how that happens.
That's a good one. How about relative to franchisees, franchisors to your business? Well, there's a good one. Actually, no, let me back up. Learning a new skill, right? Investing the time. You just said it, right? Am I ready to do this? Am I willing to do this? Right? Let's apply those two rules back right at you there, Grant.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I committed to like, I'm going to have a podcast and let's go figure this out. And there's, a lot of resources that make it available. And, you can learn a whole bunch from that. But I still, I can barely listen to my own podcast myself because they're going to be that terrible. But that's the advice that I got from like everybody who started really successful ones is like, just get them out there. Like, don't wait until you have this like, gold selling podcast, because it's never going to happen until you have kind of your rite of passage. So my apologies to anybody who listens to the Franchise Scout. They're going to suck. But there is a way for you to give some feedback, and then hopefully they'll suck less and less as we go on.
I know Grant well. So just from listening to this, you'll see that there's a lot of value added to the conversation, except for us, because to franchise or not to franchise is a very difficult conversation that you have to have with yourself. You can listen to all, but really get lessons, get advice, make sure that your business is a tight ship, and you've got a good plan for it, because this is not going to be an easy path forward, just like any other business. So Grant, where do people get a hold of you?
So they can get a hold of me if they go to frannet.com. There'll be a little window. You type in your postal code, and that'll take you right to my smiley face. And you can just book an appointment right from there, or you can pick up the phone or send me an email.
That's
fairly
good.
Straightforward. Do you want my phone number? Is it we going to make it?
No phone numbers here. Okay. No phone numbers here. Okay. You'll get crank calls.
Okay.
You'll get pizzas sent to your place. That's for sure.
Pizza, I like pizza.
Thank you very, very much, Grant, for your time. We covered a lot of ground here. I mean, I couldn't keep up. Usually I'll say, hey, this is lesson number 1, lesson number 3. I mean, listen to the entire thing. There's going to be a lot of reference down below in the podcast, a lot of links out there for you to research. Thank you very much, Grant, again. This is Martin Hunter. I am the host of What CEOs Talk About, and I will see you at the next episode. Oh, and I always forget, press subscribe. Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to What CEOs Talk About. Make sure to click subscribe to get notified about future episodes, or check us out at www.whatceostalkabout.com.